The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Steven Zakash here again with my co-host Tulio Siragusa and our special guest who we'll introduce in a moment. So research shows that employees with highly empathetic senior leaders report significantly higher creativity and engagement, with 61% saying they are more innovative and 76% saying they are engaged, compared to only 13% and 32% under less empathetic leaders. And it's also estimated that companies perceived as unempathetic are putting as much as $180 billion in employee retention costs at risk each year. So when leaders practice real empathy, people do better work, stay longer, contribute more fully. And when they do not, the costs show up in burnout, disengagement, and those quiet exits. So today we're exploring what empathy and leadership looks like in practice and how it shows up in high performance environments and what it takes to scale empathy across an entire organization. Tulio, introduce our special guest today.
Yes, very excited for our guest today. Our guest is Christopher Steer. He's the founder and CEO of Steer LLC. Chris leads an organizational advisory firm that helps leaders, boards, and teams build better organizations through leadership development, strategic planning, and organizational excellence initiatives. He brings more than 30 years of experience as an entrepreneur, as an attorney, and an operator, and describes himself as a chief energy officer, helping executives and teams adopt a permanent beta mindset that is always learning and never done. From elite athletes and board members to small and mid-market organizations, Chris works at the intersection of performance, service, empathy, and humility. Chris, welcome to the Bliss Business Podcast. We're excited to have you.
Thank you, Tulio. Thank you, Steven. Appreciate what you are doing. Thank you on behalf of all of us that are leading, operating, doing life out there. The idea of, Steven said this before we got on, the idea of systemizing kindness just really lands with me and our team at Steer. So thank you both. And also thank you for putting some of the metrics and the data to it.
Yes.
Right? That carries weight. So thank you for that.
I know. I mean, you have to do that. We realize to kind of sell it in to some people. So otherwise, I think a lot of people, when you talk about empathy, the word, maybe they're just these days thinking, oh, well, it's just like being nice or emotionally, expressive or something. So when you talk to leaders about empathy, how do you kind of define it, and what does kind of empathetic leadership actually look like in action?
Sure. So empathy is so interesting when I think about the last 31 years of my professional career. I don't know that I mentioned empathy, gentlemen, 15 years ago. I don't know if I ever used the word. Over the last 10 to 15 years, it has become such a part of the lexicon, of the language of leadership. And this, I'm happy to say, and you all are really helping to drive this as well, I'm happy to say that when we do engage with leadership, whether that's in for-profit, nonprofit, small, large, leadership is at least connected to the word in some way. It's not like it's the first conversation, thankfully. But to your question, though, Steven, at the end of the day, people produce performance. So if I'm leading an organization, I need to be able to find the ways to be able to get results through other people. Unless I'm a solopreneur, that's going to be my principal charge. And for that to be true, how can I operate in an optimized way without empathy? How can I operate without being in the shoes of someone else and seeing their perspective, which is hopefully what's going to make me a better leader anyway, that I'm surrounding myself with people who are going to make me better, who are there for a reason to see and to complement the ways that I don't see. And so empathy is, in terms of leadership in the world that we live in, Tulio and Steven, It's the ability to see and understand and really live in the shoes of someone else's perspective. And without it, you will never be, and this is not just anecdotal, this is data driven, you will never be fully optimized in your organization. That requires you get results through people. So thank you for the forum to talk about it, because clearly we're pretty passionate about it.
Yeah, I know. And I love that you brought up the perspective like 15 years ago. It'd be pretty rare when you'd see it in the conversation. And to me, when I step back and you kind of look at it from this sort of growth evolutionary standpoint, this is really what it is just love finding its way through business. And, it's inevitable. And thankfully, we have all the stats and data that say, yeah, this is not just the right thing to do, but it's also, going to make you more profitable, because that makes it much easier to get people to do the right thing with thinking about empathy and thinking about others, as you mentioned.
Oh, for sure.
Well, it's interesting. I think that a lot of the Industrial Revolution operating models have survived. And years ago, the way that the models were shaped and how you run a business and what you expect from people is very much similar to this very rigid, predicated, like wanted everybody to be like a machine. And unfortunately, it's like that's an old system. So I'm curious, because people often confuse empathy with sympathy, or at least how to apply it. I love your description of it. And you've spent decades working with executives, boards, and high-performing team. Looking across that experience, where do you see leaders most often misunderstand what empathy is, and how does that misunderstanding get in the way of the performance of the culture?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because it's actually touches on something that we often have to educate on, because as you have referenced, Tulio, empathy is not being nice. That's not the essence of this, and it's not a proxy for performance, right? It's a lever to be unlocked and to be better understood. Where we see leaders miss, to your question, where we see them miss is to over dial the empathy to the point where it loses its intention and its meaning, and we're just substituting kindness or nice into the equation. But that's not the point. The point is to see the perspective of someone else and to hear them, not simply to express kindness. So we see that a lot, and then we see it maybe misleveraged or misutilized when you just a leader would embrace without questioning, embrace without good data and testing the thoughts and ideas of others, just in the interest of empathy, as opposed to in the interest of what is the mission and intent and objectives of the organization. So we see that being a miss in maybe a little bit of an over-dialing, or a too readily accepting perspective just to try to demonstrate that you're an empathetic leader, when in fact that might not be aligned with what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think you have to have that kind of that balance of accountability with empathy. Are there specific moments in a leader's day where empathy matters most, and where kind of a lack of empathy does the most damage?
For those who need a very practical application of this.
Yeah, sure. No. So imagine this scenario. Let me give you a couple scenarios. One would be in leadership and management of people, when you have, you have a one-on-one. Okay, you have a one-on-one meeting. And what an opportunity that you have in your hand to impact that individual's trajectory that day and beyond. There is such a noble charge that you have right there. Why would you ever waste that? One of the ways you can waste that is not to listen to that individual, for you to take over that one-on-one and just be broadcast only, and not asking questions, not acknowledging some wonderful value creation from them, not listening. This is a huge miss. I see this comes up all the time. The second tactical example would be in more of the team setting. When all eyes are on you, right? Everyone's watching, everyone's observing, whether this is you're distributed or whether you're in person. People are watching, people are listening. As a leader, how do you handle the way that the conversation goes? Are you creating space for people? Are you creating the curiosity, as you all referenced earlier, that is required to advance good ideas? Are you mindful of your own body language and the way that you're responding? All these things can be moderated. And it's not, this is an important point. It's not that you're trying to be someone other than who you are. It's that you're able to be an evolved, mature, enlightened leader to be able to channel your emotion, channel your energy, channel your leadership. And so a little bit of a long-winded answer, guys, but those are two examples where I see that opportunities in the course of a leader's day where they might have those opportunities to really demonstrate that empathy, or as Stephen, you alluded to, the love within that relationship. And I can't remember the attribution, gentlemen, but there's a quote that stuck with me for years, which is, you can really love someone once you know their story. And those two examples that I just gave, you can't suck the air out of the room and expect to know someone's story, right?
Yeah, I love your description and how you tied in curiosity, because you can't be empathetic without curiosity. It's just impossible. It built into the equation. And then I really enjoy the fact that you mentioned that you can channel it, because some people think, well, I don't have it. I don't have that quality, but it's actually a practice trait that you can embody at any given moment based on the circumstances. And curiosity is the key to it all, right?
I think it's part of maturing is
Right.
the ability to take on more perspectives. That's how you mature. And that's, in order to do that, you have to have empathy. You have to have that curiosity too.
Right.
Absolutely. Even in design thinking, the first stage is to empathize, but there's another layer of design thinking which has a stage before that, which is to be curious.
Right.
That there's a substage that says, first start with being curious. Like, what is it that you're solving? What's the problem? What's the issue? What's the need, right? Being curious, and then empathizing with how that impacts individuals, so you can translate that curiosity into real life, and then coming up with prototypes from there is the key. But I'm just curious. You've been around this a long time, and there's always some pushback sometimes from some leaders who think, well, if I'm too empathetic, it's just going to slow me down. I've got to be the tough, hard driver. Especially sales leaders, sometimes they think they're the ones who can't be the most empathetic. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, we see this, yes, within sales organizations and sales environments. Sometimes you see this, but the way I think about this, Tulio, is at the end of the day, what are we looking for in an effective leader who's representing, reflecting the empathy? They've got to be someone who has the intellectual humility. Like you said with design thinking, it's impossible to learn something if you think you already know it. Right. Mm-hmm. That's a 2,000-year-old phrase. Yep. Never been more true than right now. Right. Yep. And so it is, I whether it's a hard driving organization, it's not this or that. You can be a results oriented, performance based organization and still put empathy, kindness, love at the front. It's not this or that. And I think that's where that's part of the evolution. I think, Stephen, you referred to it as the maturity, right? The professional maturity that happens, especially through experience and this wonderful thing called wisdom, right? You come to find that the better way to drive sustained performance is with these substantive conversations about how do I get performance through people? Well, empathy is a big part of that equation.
speaking about sustained, so, one of the things that really, when we talked about like systems of kindness, is
Mm.
that, you always have that one personality sometimes, that person who might be super empathetic, they just come by it. That's part of their personality, and they hold everything together, right? But when they're gone and you have that kind of vacuum, then you're unable to sustain it. And so this is why we're like, how can you systemize some of
Mhm.
these things in an organization,
Yeah.
so that it continually runs, rather than depending on that, that one sort of naturally empathetic individual, or that, the cult of personality, or whatever that you've got going on there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I go back to an athletic metaphor. You need reps. You need reps, right? And this is part of, our whole mantra, which is very similar to what you all are helping us drive forward through your podcast and your work, is this idea of permanent beta. You're never done learning, you're never done growing, right? And so when that gap is left, when that void is created by that person departing, you hopefully there has been a system in place to build this muscle within other members of the team, so that the stark contrast is not as present. But even when that's true, the concerted effort to build up reps in this area, and in our work with all of our clients over the years, but also with our performance psychologists that are a part of our team, we know, and this is some of the neuroscience with this, is we know we can get behavior change to become habit change to become mindset change. But the only way that's going to happen is deliberate practice. And so to answer your question, more directly, it's what are we putting in place in leader and management development, in one-on-ones, performance reviews, just the culture of how we do things around here. Are we demonstrating and modeling the behavior where we listen, we acknowledge, we ask good questions, we take ideas from every corner of the organization? These are the things that we can not only do, but then systematically acknowledge that we're doing, so that when someone joins the organization or someone joins a leadership team, they're like, okay, yeah, I'm ready for this, because this has been built as rigor within our organization consistently. And so that's why I sort of invoked that, a little bit of that athletic metaphor at the start.
Yeah. And the reps is so important. And you mentioned systematically acknowledging it, which is something that I think, we've built in our systems here, in our digital agency, where we have just practices where these things just, it's just part of our daily reps that we're doing. And so that, when someone comes in there, I don't have to be there. So we've got 4 or 5 other people kind of holding the torch at any given moment on there. And it's just, like you said, it's that's how you kind of build it, so that it's not just that one person.
Exactly.
You
No,
said
that's well said.
You said something really interesting, Chris, and to me it spoke to identity, right? That's why I love neuroscience, because it changes your ability to have a different identity. You don't just learn the traits, you actually change your identity, which is your beliefs. And I think there's been a lot of focus on leaders becoming empathetic. So we focused a lot, I think, in the past decade or more on having more enlightened monarchs. But what happens when the enlightened monarch dies or leaves, then the culture changes, right? So to your point, instilling that identity across the entire organization, scaling it, I think needs to be more of a focus now more than ever. And I'm just curious, because it's easier to do in a small environment where you've got a tightly knit group of people, and it feels natural because there's that intimacy. But it gets harder as you go across layers and scale much bigger companies with diverse geographies. Yeah. So in your experience, what does it actually take to scale that empathy across an entire organization?
Yeah. Commitment, right? It's a mindset. You have to want this to be true. Now, there is the sandwich effect here. From the executive leadership perspective, we always have this phrase that we encourage executive leadership teams: take it back to the plan. Take it back to the plan. What's the plan say? Does our vision, does our mission, do our values, which we cascade systematically across our organization, are they conducive to creating empathy in our organization? Are the strategic priorities what matters most? Can we layer in, can we stencil empathy across those? That's top down. Now, what has to happen across and from the bottom up is that there is the cultural belief that this matters. We act this way. We acknowledge this way. We reward this behavior. I am constantly connected to it. And then you've got that incredibly important middle layer, because where do organizations often break? They break in the middle, right? It's where that aspirational system of empathy is not reaching all layers of the organization. Oftentimes, it's because we've broken in the middle. So are we actually investing the time and development of human skills like empathy into our middle management? And I'm answering the question specific to how you framed it, Tulio, that as you get into a larger organization, like larger organizations become more complex, and complexity can stunt growth.
Yeah.
And so it's an ongoing challenge, but boy, you can make it a heck of a lot easier as a leader or manager if you are leading with empathy, a true curiosity, because you're never going to be concerned with good ideas being stamped out or not being surfaced where we can be better. Because part of, and I love that you all focus on systems, because part of the effective systems and systems thinking is feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
And so with a good feedback loop, I'm going to those closest to the challenges and opportunities to be able to hear where the efficiencies lie or are broken.
You have to go where the work is being done. You can't
Right.
manage from an ivory tower and have empathy. It's just not possible.
Well, and I mean, Tulio, we've talked about this before in some of those places where we've seen that system broken. Sometimes there's that feedback loop being shut down or non-existent. Right. And so, it just spins off into some crazy directions.
I mean, it takes a certain level of maturity too for a leader to be open, because that feedback loop can open you up to criticism. You have to be willing to welcome that, because if you're not committed to growing and you're just trying to validate yourself by people agreeing with you, you're not. It's not going to happen. Right. That's you're 1 foot in the megalomaniac stage.
Right.
So
exactly right.
That requires a certain conscious growth individual and healing some traumas as well. So we have a couple of audience questions, but before we go into them, because I think it's very timely with this conversation, I wanted to ask one more question around: do you think it's possible to create metrics around empathy and culture without turning them into these performative checkboxes?
I do. And there's a little bit of a layered response here, because on the one hand, I think sometimes we take empathy and we stick it within the engagement scores, and that's okay, like that's relevant, right? Because engagement does reflect my willingness to give my best at work, and when done properly and surveyed well, I think it does give you good insight into the organization. However, if that doesn't really speak to the root reason why we want to introduce empathy into leadership and management, then we're probably not getting as much data or the right data as we want in that engagement survey. So with that said, the more substantive or accessible indicators would be the surveying around whether you feel that your manager listens. Do they ask good questions? Do they value your input? I would love to see that data. And oftentimes there's organizations that are looking at that data, right? do we feel that ideas can be surfaced? It sort of toes the line with some of that psychological safety questioning that we've talked about over the years. But I really think what our earlier part of our conversation underscores this point, which is it really is the curiosity and and making sure that we are getting the good ideas and the perspectives of others.
Yeah,
And
companies like World Blue, do a really good job surveying the employee base, and then they use that as a way to see where they are. But that's usually part of a broader transformation for creating a self-managed structure, which is instituting equivalents across the organization, which again requires very evolved leaders to go in that direction. We got a couple of audience questions.
All right, let's do them.
All right, first one. Any tips on how to display more empathy with remote teams? This is from a LinkedIn user.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Great question.
Wow, great question. And gentlemen, isn't it just unbelievable when you just think back 6 years, just how radically different we are doing work today? It is remarkable. Thank you for your question, LinkedIn user. And so one of the things that we see be consistently effective in this way is invariably you need to connect with the person, because what is personal is universal, right? And so there needs to be the humanistic aspect of how are you? Like, how are you doing? Tell me something asynchronous, or tell me a hobby. Tell me something about what you're doing beyond this project that we're meeting about, right? That is very much a way to connect with the human. It sort of goes back to what we talked about earlier about knowing people's stories. And then the other one is just being able to connect in a way that is not systemized. In other words, it's I've got a colleague, I'll use a true story. We have one of our colleagues who's based out of Dallas. I want to be able to text her and check in. That's not part of it's not on her calendar, but it's the care quotient, I guess is what I'm getting at, right? Yeah. It's, do I feel clear? Do I feel cared for? Do I feel connected? And that doesn't necessarily always take a script. And so that's how I would respond to that. And Tulio, I wanted to make sure I put one more finer point on my earlier answer. I think another way that we can measure this is actually with leadership and management 360s, because that is oftentimes a useful way. Yeah.
Love those. And engagement too. I mean, engagement's a very telltale sign of how people are active people. We use OKRs. We're very collaborative on how we do it. And then we can see how much engagement, because week in, week out, show up, they take on challenges, they work, they collaborate. You can see the activity. And it's over time, it's, now we got an 100% engagement, so it's, you can tell just by people's willingness to contribute, because they feel they can. We got another audience question.
Right.
Okay, actually, this is from our new producer, Martha Huerta on YouTube. Okay, do you see a different approach to empathy from older than younger generation? Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And this is the generational framing. This comes up a lot these days because we've got 5 different generations actively working in the workforce, and so I do see a difference, but it's not uniform. It's not uniform. One of you mentioned, I think it was Stephen, who said in some cases there's just intrinsic empathy. There's just people who are just built that way. And I definitely do not see that is more equated with an older generation than a younger generation. However, I do see that the conversations around culture, emotional intelligence, and empathy tend to be more readily embraced by younger generation, because I feel like it's been a little bit more accessible. It doesn't mean that X and Boomer are not open to it. Not at all. I'm not saying that at all. It's just sometimes the conversations are more readily accessible because there's a little bit more familiarity with some of those aspects of the modern workforce.
Yeah, the way I kind of look at it too is there's been a lot of work, there always is, of like the older generations kind of moving us along just a little bit by little bit, with our general gravity when it comes to things like empathy and love and stuff like that, to the point where, though, the younger generations, they come along much faster because they're pulled up much faster to that,
Mm,
to a higher starting point with their empathy, so that I think they get to that point where these conversations they're ready to happen, even
yeah.
if they aren't quite there. But they get there because it's being pulled up much faster than
Mm,
previously. It's just something, when you study like consciousness, I think it's sort of a natural flow to how we sort of evolve this way.
yeah.
We've also modeled the pain of doing it in a different way.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
for sure. I mean,
I'm not going down that
that
fast.
is part of it. That is part of it.
Absolutely.
It's not pretty sometimes, but when you step back, it is kind of beautiful. But up close, it can be messy and traumatic.
No. So
All right.
so good. And I would just, Stephen, I think to that point, empathy also creates more space for your own self-awareness.
Mm.
And that is something that is such a driver of leadership performance that we see. Can you go within first, right? You used the word consciousness a couple times today, and it really resonates with me. Do you have the consciousness of self, right? And your impact and your energy on the rest of the organization and on your team and your direct reports, whatever that would be, like having that elevated sense of self, knowing who you are, is only bettered by the demonstration of empathy. It requires you to continue to reflect and look within, which I think is incredibly valuable. That maybe is not talked about as often, because in some cases we're talking about empathy as an action as opposed to a self-reflection.
Yeah, and I always say, we said on the show, it's like, as a leader, people don't need to deal with your childhood traumas. Try and work on them a little bit. Have some of that self-awareness and put, some effort there. It can be painful, but it's going to impact the organization.
Right.
Just from
Work on your stuff and leave it at home. Now let's move on. We ask this question to all of our guests. Really, the role purpose plays into the impact that it can have in an organization, and even your own purpose as you practice and you run your business and the work that you do. And interesting studies have shown that a lot of employees who feel connected to a clear purpose in an organization tend to work more. They tend to stay longer. They go the extra mile. They recommend the organization to others. They feel like they're part of something greater than themselves. So when you pair that with empathy, you sort of get this powerful combination of human and business outcomes put together. When you zoom out from specific client engagement and projects, what would you say is the deeper purpose that sits underneath your work at Steer? And how does that purpose shape the way you think about empathy and leadership?
Yeah, the broader purpose is to pull people up, to build people up. Here's what I mean. In many respects, members of our team, I'll now just use myself as an example. I feel like in many respects, when we started Steer 5 years ago, I had enjoyed a 27-year apprenticeship. And in that 27-year apprenticeship, I acquired all this crystallized intelligence through wins and losses and bruises and scars, and synthesizing that together puts me in a blessed position to be able to share those perspectives and that synthesis with others in their journeys. And so it's not, and the wonderful thing, it compounds. So it's not just mine and those of the Steer team. We've now worked for 30 plus years with organizations and leaders. So bringing all that compounding experience to make others better, help them in their leadership and management and their personal journeys. And I think because we are able to take some of that crystallized intelligence and build better leaders and organizations, that's where the purpose comes from.
So one of the questions that we like to ask on this show is, as we kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show, is about love in business.
Hmm.
What role would you say love plays in business?
This may be, maybe not. Maybe this is something that you all, as well researched as you all are, as accomplished as you guys are, but I actually say it this way: accountability is love.
Mm.
Accountability is love. If I didn't love you, why would I try to hold you accountable? If I didn't love the mission of this organization, why would I try to hold anybody accountable? Like, accountability demonstrates, and this is where it's a real eye opener for some that we work with when we hear this for the first time, because you are doing anyone a disservice. You're not loving them if you are withholding information from them that would make them better, that would help them be a better steward of the organization or of their role. So actually, accountability is love. Now, we have all seen how that gets sabotaged a bit in certain workplaces, and accountability becomes punitive.
Mm.
But in fact, accountability is love. And that's where, as you all are helping to push this message so clearly, empathy helps us create accountability for love.
Yeah, accountability is clarity, right?
Yeah.
And clarity, you can't have an organization without, that kind of clarity and be empathetic to people.
Right.
It's just a recipe for kind of trouble, right?
Absolutely. Ultimately, if you can create a culture where everyone feels a sense of self-accountability to each other, you can't stop that culture.
Yeah.
It's an unstoppable company because
Great point.
we're all holding, like, I always think, like, forget creating a family business model. Like, some families are dysfunctional. You don't want to hang out with some family members, right? But your friends, you choose your friends, right? And friends hold each other accountable all the time. They support each other when one is down. They celebrate each other. They don't compete with each other. And they call each other out when one's going off track. I mean, that's what good friends do. That's what good teams, sport teams do as well. So
exactly.
Yeah, accountability is love. Like you said, I love that, because you can't have it without it. You can't be a friend to someone and just let them go off the rails. You gotta, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah. Like, one of our first shows was on resentment, right? And so
Right.
if you're not holding someone accountable, or to a different standard than other people in some way, you're going to build this resentment among your team, and it's not loving, right? It's a problem, and it's just going to get worse. So
Right.
you do have to have, just thinking about that, you got that superstar player on the team, right? It could be basketball, whatever. And if they aren't, covering on defense or doing this other thing, shortcutting, the rest of the team's going to be thinking, hey, why is there a double standard here? And you're not going to be as good as you could be.
Yeah, well said. I could make a pretty compelling case that my whole journey towards this space began. I played Division I sports, and it was all about team. That's my whole life until 22 years old was about family and team. Well, there's a lot of love there.
Yeah.
And on the team side, I don't want to let my teammate down. That's love.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so we're coming up at the end, but before we do, let's see if we can give the audience a quick little gift, right? So for those listening who want to bring more empathy and love into their leadership without losing clarity and accountability, what is one concrete step, one that they can take right now, this month, this new month of February, to move in that direction? What would you give them as a gift to think about?
Be the world's best listener. Be the world's best listener. Listening is a sign of respect. Listening is where you create and find good ideas. Listening is where you build love. Be the world's best. Listening is how you synthesize that crystallized intelligence that I referenced. Make it a point to be the best listener in the room, or we like to say, be the world's best listener. That is a concrete step forward.
Love it. Now, Chris, for those who want to learn more about you and Steer LLC and your work on high performance leadership, where can they find you and follow you and get in touch with you?
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. SteerLLC.com is our website. You can find me, Christopher Steer, on LinkedIn as well. We also publish a newsletter on LinkedIn called The Art and Science of Leadership. And we will soon be releasing the Steer Lab next month, which is an online learning platform for leaders and managers. So we're very excited about that. But gentlemen, I'm very grateful for the work that you do. And it's wonderful to iron sharpens iron on these kinds of conversations. So thank you very much.
Chris, thank you. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in and asking the questions as well. And I love today that we talked, empathy, but we also mentioned humility in there, something that, is one of my personal values, and can't be said enough. Maybe look into your own life and your own leadership and ask, where empathy is already a strength and where it might not be, and do the same with humility. I really think that's how you grow. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.